Hello everyone, this is the third in the series called Unforgotten Heroes, and today I'd like to speak about the person I always refer to as the Rebbe in my life, the Ostrov-Kalushiner Rebbe of Dovid Speigel, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Earlier this year I gave a hesped for him, which I couldn't believe was so widely listened to. Over 2,000 people heard it, which just shows you how a little Rebbe in the 5 towns has such an influence on so many others. So this is not a hesped. This is, as I said, my experiences with the person, and in this case, with the Rebbe. The Rebbe had a small little shtibel in Cedarhurst, New York, where we davened for many years. And therefore, my first memories of a shul, of davening, of Yom Kippur, of a Rosh Hashanah, always goes back to that. There's no question that first impressions count. The Gemara talks about Girsa de Yanuka being on a higher level than what you learn later in life because you come without any preconceptions. And that's exactly why I have such strong memories of Rab Dovid Speigel, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. So I had many exposures, not just on Shabbos, but during the week. A Rebbe with a regular talis and tefillin during the week versus talis that had beautiful silver on it, like many Hasidim wear on Shabbos. And my first memory is him saying each and every word of the siddur a little out loud. You could hear every single word. The words of the siddur are not to be taken as just an option, but as an obligation. And therefore, every word was verbalized. My second memory was the way he davened. Clenched fists, swaying, going like this, talking to the Ribbono Shel Olam, talking to God as if he's standing right there, and that's the way it should be, because that's the way the Shulchan Aruch says you should view yourself when you daven, and that's the way it was. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes with a cry, sometimes with a happy note. And God blessed him with a melodic voice, so his davening was one that was pleasant to listen to. To give you just one little glimpse, listen to the way he says the final bracha under the chuppah in the following video.
Asher bara sasain v'simcha chasan v'kala gilorina ditza v'chedeva ahava v'acheva v'shalayim v'reyus meheira Adonai Eloheinu yishama Yehuda u'v'chutzais Yerushalayim Kayol sasayin v'kayol simcha Kayol chasan v'kayol kala Kayol mitzalais chasonim mechupasam uneyarim imishtei niginasam Baruch Atah Adonai Misameach Chasanim Hakala.
So as you can hear, this was a very contagious voice that people came to hear. Most importantly, saw a vivid example of what it means to daven. When you talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not saying words. That's Kriyat Shema, Kriyat HaMegillah. It's Avodah Shebalev. It's the work of the heart. And therefore, when you talk to God, you have to act out the words of the siddur. You don't say, Hodula Hashem Kitov Kilo Olam Chazdo at the climax of Hallel, like you say the words Unetane Tokef on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, climaxing with Mi Yichyeh, Mi Yamut, who's going to live and who's not going to live. And yes, when you talk to God, you do not feel embarrassed. You should clench fists. You should sway back and forth. You should pour your heart out, because you have a rare opportunity to speak to the master of the universe. And if you're going to speak to the master of the universe, then do so authentically. The words of the siddur. The Rebbe was very makpid to always read it out of the siddur, even though we all know it by heart. But no, don't just read it. Express it and act it, because you have a rare opportunity to do so. And the Rebbe utilized those opportunities. You could see the difference between the more faster pace during the week versus Psuke de Zimra on Shabbos. I still remember the nigun he used. Ve'amim b'meisharim shiramalot esayin mi'ayin yavo ezli. Psuke de Zimra on Shabbos. The Psalms of Praise on the holiest day of the week that we're privileged to keep. Different from the mundane Sheshet Yemei HaMaseh, 6 days of the week. But I have another memory of the Rebbe, not a Rebbe davening. I have a memory of the Rebbe giving a speech. When I was a young kid, I don't remember a word he said. But I do remember him referring to the Ribbono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, endless times, and every time he said it, his whole body trembled. And every time he talked, you saw that he was engaged in what he said. Just listen to the way he spoke when he gave a hesped for his beloved brother-in-law, Rav Binyamin Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik Livracha.
It says, "Havidoim Eloi," or "Lachta b'dvacha." Havidoim Eloi. Could you be doing to the Ribbono Shel Olam? I want to tell you, when Rabbi Akiva Eiger was nifter, they said, it says in the beginning of the davening, "Hoidu Lashem Kiru B'Shmoi," for a Yid to recognize the Ribbono Shel Olam. You don't have to speak about him. All you have to mention his name. Kiru B'Shmoi. If you mention his name, is Hoidu Lashem. People give recognition. As we have been gesagt, Rabbi Akiva Eiger. I say, you mention the name Rabbi Kamenetsky anywhere. Hoidu Lashem Kiru B'Shmoi. Binyamin, your name is here. B'holach lefonecha tzidkecha. There's police. There'll be hundreds of people walking and escorting you to the Olam Oemes. There are much more, thousands and thousands of tzedakahs that are going in front of you. I can't mention them. There are millions and millions and millions. I would be right that nothing would allow me. I would tell you what he gave away of himself. He gave away his whole thing.
The way he spoke at the Levaya was the way he spoke every Shabbos. There was never just a speech. It was dramatic. It was his entire body saying, Kol atzmotai tomarna Hashem mi kamocha. My whole bones all say, God, who's like you. First and foremost, in his dealings with people. And secondly, in his kiyum hamitzvot before Hashem. Which brings me to a story that's so simple and yet so taken for granted today. The Rebbe told the following story that happened that week. He was driving out of a certain part of Brooklyn, and two Hasidim of a certain sect are waiting for a hitch. Since the Rebbe's a nice guy, he takes them into his car. And as they're driving out, they see a big sign that says, Kan Yibaneh Yeshiva, whatever. Here, a yeshiva is going to be built. So the Rebbe comments, wow, this and this person on the sign is giving so much money for a yeshiva. And the Chassid in the back says, he's a goy. The Rebbe says, he's a goy? He's not really a goy, says the chassid. He's not Shomer Shabbos, so he's a goy. The Rebbe said, and I remember the words, how can you talk that way? He's a Yid. He's a Yid. How can you talk that way? How can you talk that way about a fellow Jew? So I'm in Israel, we're in the middle of an election campaign. How can you talk that way about a fellow Jew? You disagree with him? You're right. You don't vote for the same party? Definitely you're right. How can you talk that way and say he's a guy? But I have a third memory. Not of a Rebbe davening, not of a Rebbe teaching Torah, but of a Rebbe sitting at a Kiddush on Shabbos. The Rebbetzin, Zichrona Livracha, made an amazing vegetarian cholent. So there's the Rebbe after davening, not a short one, put on his strimal, spodik, sits at the head of the table, and makes Kiddush. And Al Kain Beirach Adoshem et Yom HaShabbos Vayikadesheyu. Then he would look in the cup, see a shadow of his face, and make the Borei Pri Hagafen. It was dramatic. And I could see him sitting at the table, eating the cholent, talking to the people. So the Rebbe that was so holy, the Rebbe that stood there as the Chazan on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with a kittel and his black gartel over the kittel, is the same Rebbe that could have small talk with his congregants. There was no distinction between the two. And how do I know there's no distinction? Simply because there was an episode that happened in the year Tufshin Mem Dalet, either 83 or 84, and me, being in the shul as a kid, had no idea that it happened. So after the Rebbe's death on Yud Zayin Adar Tufshin Pei Vav, on the website called bechatzros.com, or Bechatzrot HaKodesh, in the Holy Courts, is an article about the Rebbe. Toyer ba'olam HaChasidus, grief in the Hasidic world because the Rebbe passed away. And in this article is a piece of information that me, being a kid in the shul, had no idea about, nor was I told about from adults, and I'm not so sure anyone knows. That in the year Tufshin Mem Dalet, with his father's death, he was crowned in Admorus as a Rebbe. That's why he's called the Ostrov-Kalushiner Rebbe. Now, I'm a kid in the shul. I didn't know about this. I'm not so sure any of the congregants knew about this. Because there was no distinction between the Rebbe that has a name versus the Rebbe that doesn't have a name. The Rebbe that davens and lanes and teaches Torah, and the Rebbe that's a kibbutzer and sits at the table at Kiddush. The Rebbe that looks holy and the Rebbe that can talk to children. The only change that happened was that a throne-like chair was brought into the shtibel. It must have been his father's chair, and it was brought for him to sit on. Outside of that, the Rebbe, I believe, made a conscientious decision that he is going to be a Rebbe of congregants, not a Rebbe of Hasidim. Just like Chana davened before HaKadosh Baruch Hu on that fateful day in Shiloh that we read about in the Haftorah of the first day of Rosh Hashanah. She davens for Zera Anashim, a seed of people. The Gemara explains, I don't want a guy that's too big or too short, too smart or too stupid. I want a regular guy. And the Rebbe, though he wore Hasidic garb, though he had the name, he wanted to be a Rebbe that was accessible, not a Rebbe that has 5 gabayim in order to get in to see him. And therefore I had no qualms to go up to the Rebbe anytime and say, hey Rebbe, can you tell me what page we're on? I had no qualms whatsoever to walk into his house, which was connected in those years to the shul with a door. All of us opened the door, went into his living room, his dining room, his kitchen. And believe me, if the Rebbetzin didn't want it, or if the Rebbe didn't want it, they would have told us to stop. And we would have listened. I believe the Rebbe said, I do not want any blockades between me and my congregants. This leads me to one of my most favorable memories of that Kiddush. So because it was a small shul, there was no social room, So after davening, we brought the kiddush into the room that we davened. And the kids were very helpful in this regard. So the minute the davening was getting towards the end, we started to help to bring out the kiddush. Well, amongst the various items you bring out is the becher upon which you say kiddush. So a certain kid gets the becher. And behold, the guy holding the becher is tag, you're it. Now, in those years, that's like pikuach nefesh, tochet kol haTorah kula. If you're it, you gotta become not it. And the minute you were tagged, you had to tag someone else. So he would be it, and you wouldn't be it. So therefore, this guy started to run after other people. In the course of the running, the becher fell. So davening's over, the Rebbe wants to make kiddush, and there's no becher. And people openly talked to the Rebbe. And they said, Rebbe, just use a cup. There were plastic cups. The Rebbe didn't want to use a plastic cup. There's a machlokes between the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Eliezer Waldenberg, and Rav Moshe Feinstein if you're allowed to use a disposable cup for kiddush. So I'm assuming the Rebbe didn't want to somech on the Tzitz Eliezer. He wanted to be machmir for Rav Moshe Feinstein. He said, no, I need a real cup. And kiddush was delayed. And this caused a cause celebre. Well, eventually the becher was found, kiddush was made, and we lived to see another day. But the Rebbe was sensitive to this. So he came up to me the Shabbos afterwards, Friday night, and said, Chia, I got a job for you. With the Yena Achrayus, to bring the becher to the place where I sit and learn. The place I used to sit for kiddush. So I said, fine, what do I know? And every week, from that week on, the Rebbitzin wouldn't give the becher to anyone else. She would say, Via Shia, where is Shia? She kept on asking. Eventually she found me. Here's the becher. And I don't think there was a week that I lost it. How do I know? Because years later, I saw a picture of the Rebbe, probably at Malava Malka, because there was a candle there. He was wearing his shtreimel, which you don't wear during the week. And there he is with that becher. So I know that the becher wasn't lost, at least not because of me. But those words, I'm giving you a Yena Achrayus, to a young kid. You know how much an influence it had on me? All of a sudden I felt I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to a shul, to the Jewish people, to make sure that they hear Kiddush. Now you could say this is a responsibility. But from that day on, I could not shed off responsibility to others. And from my perspective, when you have responsibility for the Jewish people, you don't take it lightly. That's the way he made a little kid feel. And that achrayus for the Jewish people, I hope I never looked lightly upon. And I have a fourth image of the Rebbe. So he's not davening, he's not giving a drasha, he's not eating. He's giving daf yomi at a time in which daf yomi was far from being famous. I spent the summer in the 5 towns when I was in 12th grade after making Aliyah, and every night I learned with the Rebbe Maseches Makos. It was an experience. The Rebbe not only explained things clearly, but he also was able to give you the background. Not only give you the background, to give stories that had to do with this, that, the other thing, and not to mention the fact that when someone asked a good question and he didn't know the answer to, he refused to answer. He said, that's a good question, I have to think about it. And sometimes he came back with an answer. But he was a truthful person, so therefore there was no wishy-washy answers. And I learned from that so much for life. As my Rebbe Rav Amital used to say, it's better to stay with a good question than to give a lousy answer. And I want to give a 5th memory of the Rebbe, and that is his home. In those years, the shtibel in which we davened was connected physically to his home, with a door actually dividing between the two. It's like 2 hotel rooms adjacent to one another. The whole house was at our disposal. No issue. We ran around the house. We played here. We played there. I think the Rebbe wanted his house to be your house. We had seicha. We didn't go into the Rebbe's bedroom except for once, by invitation. It's when his son was born. Get a phone call. The Rebbe's on the phone. He says, tonight you have a job. You have to say Shema Yisrael for the new baby. It's what's called Wachnacht, the night of guarding the baby before the bris. And indeed, we were invited by invitation into the bedroom in which we never went into. Baby's crib is in there. And the Rebbe led all the kids of the shul in Shema Yisrael. No one felt uncomfortable with him and around him. And how do I know that this is the case? Because of an episode that happened on Sukkot. So there we are, morning of Sukkot, first day. The Rebbe sitting in his place, as I mentioned, saying Sukkot Zimra a bit higher than a normal davener. Everyone can hear every word. And their kids playing right near him. Doesn't face him. Doesn't say shush. No one says shush. That's the shtibel he created. Everyone's welcome. And in the middle of the game, all of a sudden, thump, you hear something fall. You look at the Rebbe, he went like this. And continued davening. What happened? His stender fell. And in the stender was his esrog. And yes, the esrog broke, namely the pitam, separated from the esrog. I don't have to tell you, on the first day of Sukkot, that is puzzle. An esrog that I'm sure the Rebbe looked forward to shaking and using, gone. The Rebbe didn't stop davening Sukkot Zimra. He didn't make a big tumult out of it. I don't remember a speech about it. I don't remember rules about playing near the Rebbe. Nothing. Hallel, which the Rebbe led. He went to Ushachayim, his son-in-law. His son-in-law gave him his esrog, probably matana minat lahachzir. And he stood up there and led Hallel. He led Oshanos. Didn't make any mention of this episode. A Rebbe who wants a shul that has kids that are welcome, sometimes this is the price you pay. And number two, if there's a solution, don't lose your cool. So maybe a disappointment yet, but does not warrant making a shul that's not unwelcome to kids, let alone losing your cool. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that beyond all his qualities of a davener and a learner, of an easy to talk to individual, he had his points of view. And they debated in the shul with many that didn't share his points of view. Issues of the state of Israel, what we call secular pursuit of college, and so many other things. There were debates around the Shalashudas table. There were debates before davening, after davening, and felt totally comfortable in the shul. It never fazed anyone because he was such a friendly person. A huge shmeichele, a big smile on his face most of the time. No one felt uncomfortable with him and around him. So I can't tell you of any divrei Torah on the Parsha, on the Yom Tovim, on Shabbos that the Rebbe taught. I was just a kid. But I learned from him something far more important than divrei Torah. Because after you learn this, learning Torah becomes natural. In an essay penned by Rav Soloveitchik called A Tribute to the Rebbetzin of Talmud, he says about his mother, she taught me that Judaism expresses itself not only in formal compliance with the law, but also in a living experience. She taught me that there is a flavor, a scent, and a warmth to mitzvot. I learned from her the most important thing in life, to feel the presence of the Almighty and the gentle pressure of his hand resting on my frail shoulders. Without her teachings, which quite often would be transmitted to me in silence, I would have grown up to be a soulless being, dry and insensitive. That's what the Rebbe taught me. There's a scent to Judaism. There's a flavor to it. It's not just fulfill this halacha, stand up here, raise the cup there, light the candles this way, eat the matzah that way. It's also about a flavor, a scent, an experience. And when you saw the Rebbe davening, learning, and dancing, you knew to feel the presence of the Almighty and the gentle pressure of his hand resting upon my frail shoulders. If I had my way, and I don't have a say in the matter, I would have suggested that on his gravestone, on his matzevo, it should have been written the words that were said about David HaMelech when he brought the Aron Kodesh to Yerushalayim. As his name was David, I think this would be the most appropriate thing. The David mecharker b'chol oz lifnei Hashem. And David was dancing with all his might before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On Simchas Torah, people came from other shuls in order to see the Rebbe dance on Simchas Torah, because for them, as was for me, he was mecharker b'chol oz lifnei Hashem. But as a congregant in the shul, it wasn't just on Simchas Torah. So it's been 40 years since I've davened in that shul on a regular basis. And yet I see the Rebbe every time I stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that's the davener I want to be. I see the Rebbe when I preach a sermon, because the excitement and itlahavus is what I want to put into my sermon above and beyond the content. Making an open home people can come into and out of is one of the most important lessons that I think Chazal teach us when they say, Tiyeh beitcha beit vad lechachamim. I feel the Rebbe every time they take out the Torah at Mincha and Shabbos, and hum to myself, Varachamim, hu yirachem, hu yirachem, amamusim. It's not the nigun here. It's not the way he sang Keladon there. It's that scent. It's that flavor of Judaism that he brought into the lives of both young and old, that I hope will be preserved for many years to come.
Hashem, udavakir beyecholoi. Shifti beveis Hashem, kol yemei chayai. Beno yam Hashem, udavakir